Everyone. We're going to get started. Lauren just received a nice phone call from her mom that she missed while we were waiting up here. I'm sure she called to wish her good luck. So we've got her mom in spirit, which is lovely. Welcome, everybody. I'm Jenny Britton, the Director of Child and Family Services here at Washburn Center for Children. On behalf of Washburn, I welcome you and invite you to bundle up with us tonight as we kick off our second year of Washburn Center's Thought Leadership Series. Our hope for this Thought Leadership Series is to bring people together for a conversation and education about healthy social and emotional development in children. It is conversations like this that truly ignite our passion and provide us with much needed opportunities to engage with our community in this critical dialogue. Mental health challenges, such as anxiety and depression, are the most common and most expensive health conditions in childhood, and something that we as a community cannot afford to ignore. This isn't a future Washburn or community problem. This is a historical and current problem that urgently needs our attention and action. Washburn is known as one of the state's leading experts on childhood trauma. We know the impacts of trauma on the trajectory of a child's development, impacts that can last a lifetime. Or in other words, we repeat what we don't repair. Part of being an expert in trauma is knowing and embracing that we can't and don't know everything. Our expertise, if you will, is in joining with children and families when they're experiencing distress, in co-creating a relationship, language, and dialogue that promotes the innate strengths and resiliency that they uniquely possess, and then build upon those together. This is how we define and live being an expert in childhood trauma. Every person, family, and situation is different, special, and uniquely theirs. And we have the privilege and opportunity to be a part of their journey towards healing. I'm so grateful that you all made the winter voyage to be here with us tonight. The more we can do as a community to learn and support healthy development, the more help and hope we can offer our children and families, both in their current state of being as well as throughout their lifetime. An investment in children's mental health is an investment in our community's future. I'm pleased to introduce our speaker tonight, Ms. Lauren Nietz. Lauren is the director of the Training Institute here at Washburn. She provides training and consultation to clinicians and professionals working with children and families and their caregivers, utilizing developmental repair, the treatment model that was developed here at Washburn. Lauren has over 15 years of experience providing therapy to adults, children, groups, and families who are struggling with the effects of trauma. Lauren has a certificate in infant and early childhood mental health from the Institute of Child Development, and she's a member of the School of Social Work community faculty at the University of Minnesota. I've had the privilege of working alongside Lauren in many roles here at Washburn, including my very first day as a clinical intern. We shared an office. And very quickly, when Lauren made the transition to the day treatment team, I took over a school-based contract that she had started at a local alternative high school. Very quickly, I learned her genius. The program was very well set up. A few weeks ago, I also got a chance to hear Lauren speak about a case. She was seeking some consultation, and she spoke with such immense respect, curiosity, and clinical depth about the family she was working with. Lauren and I have had many opportunities to work together over the last 15 years, and I've had the opportunity to see, witness, and experience her genius. Her ability to co-create relationships within the community has had a growing and lasting impact on Washburn as an organization and our community as a whole. Lauren is joined tonight by one of our amazing community partners. I cannot be more honored and excited to have Jatan White, an engagement consultant at the Northside Achievement Zone, running our Q&A portion of the evening. I'm excited for you to see what true co-creating and collaboration looks like, as Washburn and NAS have a rich and long-lasting partnership, each taking what is their expertise and making something beautiful together. Lauren will speak for about 45 minutes, and then Jatan will join her for Q&A after that. Please join me in giving Lauren a very warm welcome.
Is this working? Hi, thank you for coming tonight. You get medals for coming. just each of you for getting outside and making it without freezing. Yes, I think some people did not brave the elements tonight. So thanks for coming. I'm really excited to do this. When I was talking with the development department about this series, and our CEO kind of made me do this, I'm just kidding. He asked me, and I said yes, because I do like having people to my house. As a training institute director, I really like hosting people here. And I appreciate development and Amy Russ, the TI coordinator, who, if this was a movie, she'd be the producer, for having us here tonight. I want to talk about a concept that comes up in therapy. It comes up in our personal lives. It comes up in our friends and family. And it definitely comes up when we're caring about a young person. My guess is that you're all here because you have little people in your life. Well, I got one little person who's trying to be bigger than me right now. But you care about young people, whether it's your own children, grandchildren, you're a teacher, clinician, coach. There's a lot of different roles that are really, really, really important in supporting young people and the stressors that they have to face right now. So I'll talk about that, but then also what that stirs up in us. Because we get stirred a little bit when we have a stressed body in front of us. And when that stressed body in front of us is young and vulnerable, what we really don't want to do is fail them, right? So we want to show up as the kind of big person that our young people need. Tonight we will, I'll touch on some concepts of developmental repair as Jenny mentioned, and how some of those clinical practices that came from normative development are coming back around and how I conceptualize them. And I also, Anne, I got to thank you for being here. The creator of developmental repair is in the back. Thanks so much, Dr. Ann Garrity, for your contributions. So this concept was told to me when I was in the infant and early childhood mental health certificate, and it was so great that somebody put it into words. That no one tells you when you really start caring for a little person, your childhood shows up. The things that you went through that were good or hard or rituals, they come back. And when you've had the benefit of secure attachment and caregivers who really put your needs first, this is really helpful. I am not at all surprised that my mom called me right now from Florida. I'm not surprised. There's a vibe. She probably knows that I'm a little amped up right now and could use a little dose of her. So there's something lovely about that. And in treatment, we see that so much, and especially in our parent-child work, our family work and our parent-child work, that when an adult has had a lot of hard things happen, a lot of stressors and trauma, that when they are raising a child, things come flooding back. This was really apparent to me in working with a mother and daughter for the last couple of years, where I was gathering history on Mom, and she was a young African-American woman who was not from the Twin Cities and who moved here, and something happened to her preschool-age daughter, something terrible. I'll let you fill in what that terrible thing is. And it happened more than once. And in talking with Mom and how she kind of didn't see the signs and she didn't see the danger of the people around her that hurt her daughter. And in talking about her history, she let me know that same terrible thing happened to her at that same young age. And that was impacting how she showed up for her daughter. It was very hard to show up because she remembered feeling violated, scared, losing trust at that same age. And I said to Mom, so who was your protective shield when you were little? And she said, nobody. I had to become something. My protective shield is damaged, and I'm here now with a really broken shield. And I said, okay, there's our treatment. Your shield was damaged, but that doesn't mean that you can't be one for your daughter. So let's get the duct tape. Let's fill in the holes, and let's work on your protective shield for your daughter so that that doesn't happen again. So the treatment becomes reparative in that, unfortunately, the exact same thing happened to this preschool age girl 20 years ago and then 3 years ago with her daughter, but that doesn't mean it needs to keep happening. So we started working on let's repair your shield so it doesn't keep getting repeated. In our series, Healing from Trauma, we have to talk about trauma. And we have to define it and talk about our adverse childhood experiences. I know that almost everybody knows what that is. They're familiar with the study and familiar with a lot of the work that's being done to recognize the ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. You can get, I won't spend too much time here, you can get a lot of great information from a lot of conferences and people and books. And Nadine Burke-Harris, who is now the new Surgeon General of California, is that right? Yes. First African-American woman Surgeon General of California. She was here last year, and she did a talk on NPR. Washburn was present, and our CEO got to introduce her. She does a lot of work she's a pediatrician and does a lot of work with ACEs, and her book is fantastic. What I want to point out here with our adverse childhood experiences that too many of our young people go through, and absolutely there are people in this room that have faced some of these things. But if you see the tree above the ground, divorce, mental illness, incarceration, physical and emotional neglect, homelessness, domestic violence, substance abuse, emotional and sexual abuse, maternal depression, the thing that Dr. Burke-Harris had talked about before is the big thing about the top there is that those kinds of traumas pull a caregiver away from being able to buffer stressors to young people. And that's what makes them so much worse. Physical abuse and or having a parent, or some of those things are hard in general, but then also that it takes a caregiver away is what makes them compounding, even worse. And then I like this particular image because on the bottom there's a lot of what our families are facing as well. That is important to remember that it's part of their foundation. It's part of the roots. It's part of what some of our stressed families are coming in with, and then there's an ACE. So to be mindful of what they're like racism or discrimination and some community violence that is coming in, and then the ACEs. That's a lot of stress, and that's a lot of trauma. Nowadays, we are talking about stress and trauma on a kind of a continuum. I feel like if we're just saying trauma, it could be kind of othering, because the mother and daughter that I supported, I very luckily and very thankfully did not have the same experiences of them. I didn't have those things happen to me, and that's one of the ways that I could be a little distanced, but also help and support them. What we do identify with, all people, is the continuum of stress: positive, tolerable, and toxic stress. And just to highlight that for a bit, we need positive stress. We need to have 100 people in our training institute and have me up front and get through it and have it be successful. This is positive. This is growing stress. This is trying to be somewhere on time. This is a kid dealing with a substitute teacher when they just love their regular teacher. This is going to the dentist for some. So positive stress is good stress. Tolerable stress is a little more serious. Tolerable stress can take over your attention, your energy, and your brain. Tolerable stress could be as serious as a major car accident. It could be as serious as losing a caregiver at a young age. It also could be something that kind of takes over your world for a period of time. That's not chronic, and with good support you can get through. I was sharing with Benice Young earlier tonight that our family is under the influence of high schoolers' homework. Oh, you have kids that age, yes. I have a third grader, a sixth grader, and a ninth grader. And the ninth grader, first year high school, is kind of taking over the energy of the family in the evening. Now, it is kind of funny, and I'm really recognizing how much our family is impacted by trying to get him to sit still, finish, and then actually submit the work. There's multiple steps here. So that is with support, people can get through really, really difficult, challenging, life-affecting stuff. The one we worry about is this one. Toxic stress is, Ann Garrity always says it this way, too much for too long with too little adult help. This is the big, bad, ugly, hard factors that influence many of the families that we see here at Washburn Center. I think of situations kind of like the client that I mentioned earlier, where there's factors that not only affect the little person, but also are really affecting the big person. So it's very, very hard for mom to be supported because she's also feeling affected by homelessness and racism and a lot of other things. The other thing Dr. Bruce Perry talks about with this is kind of a triple threat where kids might be born prenatally exposed to something, their caregiver is compromised, and then they also have a trauma. That's really, really tough. And some studies have shown that toxic stress is as bad as lead poisoning. Lead poisoning is a very, very physical thing. Luckily, it's less and less happening. Lead poisoning impacts your brain development, your motor development, your cognition, your intellectual capacities. Lead poisoning is really bad, and pediatricians check for it. They check for it. They do routine screens on the skin, and they do blood tests. Toxic stress does the same thing. It impacts brain development. It impacts cognitive capacities. It impacts how kids are even moving through space in their bodies. This is where Dr. Burke Harris talks about we have a public health crisis with too many kids with toxic stress. So, on that happy note, we are fortunate enough to have a model that supports children who are struggling with toxic stress. And we're brainstorming at Washburn some of the stressors that our families are facing. So that's a lot. That's a lot of factors that will really get in the way of a child learning and growing and having a healthy trajectory. I'm sure that there are little people you know who struggle with 2 or 3 of these. I did this slide with a group of teachers in North Minneapolis in our partnership with NAS, and the teachers said, all of them. All of them. We know kids with all of them. Far too much. And what happens is these stressors get stuck in the bodies. They get stuck in the little people's bodies. And so without being able to say, oh, I'm dealing with a lot of socioeconomic stressors, so it's hard to learn today. They do their pain. They do their hurt. They do their worry. They do their confusion. And they do their sadness. They show us. They show us in their bodies. And when it comes out in a preschooler being aggressive, or it comes out in a teenager and how they talk verbally to the people around them, and you can see that it shows up, and they need our support. Someone with toxic stress or too much stress, even normal changes are hard. Jatan and I were just talking earlier about when there is a stressed person or in a stressed body, and then you give them a change, even if the change is good, it's coded as danger. So someone with too much stress sees, oh, we're going to do it this way today, or here's your substitute teacher, or no, we're not going to do the field trip today, it's too cold. You know this happened today in some schools. No skating party, too cold. What are we going to do? That's coded as danger, as rejection, as abandonment, as something negative, and can get kids derailed. However, positive relationships can help fill in the gaps. Positive relationships can help buffer and support and scaffold kids toward a more healthy trajectory. Developmental repair, the model that we use here, is something that I learned the model before I became a parent, and it has absolutely been influential in how I think about stress and needs and how I respond and how I'm showing up. This is something I found that I really like this. I want to find it and laminate it, and I wish I made it. Almost all the pictures you see are on Google Images. That's where I found them. And it's a brain. It's a brain. You got that? If you see a word in there that you like when you think of being in a repair state of mind for a young person, if you see a word you like, just say it. Listen. Value. Trust. Open. Hold. Embrace. Allow. Appreciate. Trust. Notice. Pause. I like this. And I want to go into every interaction with that in my brain. It's hard, though, when we're sparked a little bit. It's hard to keep all of that when we are walking into a situation where a stressed person is in front of us. Mutual regulation is a term that describes how in relationships, so kids learn through relationships, we all learn through relationships, and there's a back and forth, a serve and return, that people affect each other, and they respond to each other, and they can do that in healthy ways, and they can do it in not so healthy ways. And when there's a rupture, it is very important for the big person to be ready to do some kind of repair, some kind of apology, some kind of check-in. When the big person is really dysregulated, this can impact our little people. Now, I have a video, short, it's like a minute and a half, and it's not a clinical, technical, amazing, highly, wonderfully produced. Amy didn't get to produce that one. It's somebody on a cell phone in a daycare setting. And I didn't find it from some bank of clinical videos. It came in my news feed. So I'm going to show this to you, and we're going to just see what you think. I don't have the closed caption did not work. It was not right. But let's just look at that real quick.
You in timeout.
Look, my bracelet came out.
I'll put it back on. You in timeout.
As no
Don't say you supposed to be back in timeout. I didn't say get out. You and Jayla in timeout.
Well, let me tell you this, Linda.
My name ain't Linda. So you sit right there in timeout, little bad little girl.
No, let me tell you something.
No, don't tell me.
If I was in here, I would surely take a day off from you, and then a day off from these kids. I'm in the classroom. I'm just done with you.
I'm done with you too, but you in timeout.
Oh, let me tell you something, honey. This is not noise.
You're gonna be in timeout.
Oh.
That's why you in timeout right now.
I think so.
I think so.
Well, when I get up out of town and go to bed, I will be glad to go home and enjoy the rest of my life.
Wow. So there's a little, comedic part of that. But what came up for you as we're talking about mutual regulation. What did it make you think of? She's recording an interaction. So this big person is doing that. You wonder if the big person is even invested in it. Right. Is it a funny thing to upload? Are people going to react that it's funny rather than looking at the interaction? What else?
I thought it was funny how the little girl is more in tune than the big person about what the big person needs.
The little girl seems more in tune about what the big person needs than the big person. Didn't it sound like you need a day off? You need to get away from these kids. You need to go live the rest of your life. Yes?
The big person wasn't really like listening to what the little one wanted and needed at that time.
Big person wasn't even really listening. Yes. We're doing this timeout. This is what's happening. And those of you who've raised preschoolers or no child development or just the basic terms, and a timeout is meant to be an interruption, not necessarily a punishment. It's meant to interrupt behavior. And if you read, the parenting books, it says don't interact during the timeout. So it seemed like this big person needed a break and put a child or two in timeout and wasn't getting a break and she was getting escalated. And anything else to make you feel any kind of way? Yes? Yeah. There was a lot of faces like, what did you just say?
In addition to that, she never at one point did anything with her behavior. Never told her why she's in timeout, gave any indicator. She just said she was bad.
Yes.
And continued to engage with her.
That's right. So it's not even that meaningful of a punishment. I'm air quoting punishment, because does this little girl even know why this is happening this way? And she does seem like a very smart little girl. She does. And she's in tune. She watches her big people. You can hear some of the words, but also she could tell what they need.
And she was doing what the big people wanted her to do.
She was sitting there. She was sitting there, yep.
Big person.
Right. And this is one of those times where I want to, I actually now want to scoop up the big person and spend some time with her and maybe give her a little couple days off or something, because her stress level is high. And so it keeps, timeouts are great when there's a purpose and when things make sense to the kid. But I was feeling like, oh, man, and just don't call her a bad little girl. So I ask you, what do your little people need? What do kids need in your world?
To feel safe.
Need to feel safe. Yes. What else do kids need? Yes. To be valued. To be and feel valued. Yes. What else do kids need? Connection. What else? They need to feel loved. So in order to learn, what do they need from their big people? Yeah.
Leading by example.
Leading by example. Yes. I was just talking to my class this morning about mirror neurons, those things in our bodies that make us copy around them. When Jatan yawned earlier tonight, I yawned because I'm in tune with her. And mirror neurons. What else do they need to learn in order to learn?
Just paying attention.
Paying attention?
Paying attention to their wants and needs.
Yes. Attentive adults who are in tune with their needs. Ooh, you guys are good. I'm sure all your little people are getting that. So I want to talk about 3 things that will help us not repeat the negative. 3 concepts that will help us stay more in tune with the children in our lives and help us as big people do the healing and make the moves that we need to make in order to to show up in the way that our kids need. We need to be regulated and reflective enough, and I add enough a couple of times. And that was another in consultation with Dr. Garrity. we are talking about enough. And good enough therapist, good enough mother, good enough concept, safe enough. And this is also connected to some speakers that we're going to have out here later in this series, the Ericksons. They talk about this concept a lot too. And because I can't sidebar enough about enough. Safe. We want our kids to feel safe enough to make a move, to be brave, to learn. It's very, very hard to guarantee safety right now. And I don't want to make a promise that I can't keep. So I promise my clients and my children that I will keep things safe enough for them to grow. But I can't take away all the hurt. And I can't take away every scary thing. So that's why I add enough a little bit. So regulated and reflective enough, adults who are curious enough to join the child's perspective, and adults who are emotionally responsive. So I'm going to break out those three things. I love this. I'm going to read it to you. This is from a developmental psychologist, I think, Yuri Bronfenbrenner. In order to develop normally, a child requires progressively more complex joint activity, like playing and interacting, with one or more adults who have an irrational, emotional relationship with the child. Somebody's got to be crazy about that kid. That's number one, first, last, and always. That's the value. Somebody has to be excited about the kid. Somebody, somewhere. I have to tell you about Miss Karen. Miss Karen is one of our day treatment therapists. And she was really struggling in our classroom with a certain young man in second grade who I will call Marcus. And he was getting suspended from school a lot. Parent was struggling big time with his behavior at home. He had a lot going on. He probably had a PTSD diagnosis. And his behavior showed what was coded in his body. And he was hard to have in group. And of the 6 kids at a time, he was the one that could make or break the day. And when he went to school, it felt like as soon as they could move him on, they would. But Miss Karen knew that somebody needed to be excited about him. And so one day before group, she knew Marcus was on his way from school. She had already gotten a call from school that Marcus is having a hard day. Good luck in treatment this afternoon. And she was out there in the hallway right before the little bus comes in. And she was doing this. She was pre-gaming. Okay. I'm excited for Marcus. I'm excited for Marcus. I'm excited for Marcus. And she was revving herself up. And I watched this play out. And Marcus's bus comes up. He was the first one coming out the door. Bus driver has a look on his face like, oh my gosh. And Karen goes, Marcus! That is irrationally crazy. That is a crazy response. And Marcus got off the bus like, okay. And because that's not anything anybody had given him in the past couple of weeks. She set the tone with her delight. She set the tone with her saying, he needs me to be the excited person because nobody else is. She overrode her idea that, this day is going to be hard. She decided. She made the change. She didn't make him change first. And the day, per her report, was not perfect, but it was good. It was good. He has graduated from this program. And what Karen did was her liking him made other people see his essence. That was actually really pretty great. So our kids need someone to be delighted in them. And another thing I like about this quote is it doesn't say it has to be the parent. It is ideal. It's great. But also, there are some times that I am more delighted for my son to go to practice than to stay in the house and complain. I am glad your coach is delighted in you. I'll pick you up at 7. And I think that's important because kids need a network. They need other voices. They need other models. They need other people. Regulated and reflective adults can be supportive because we're taking care of ourselves. And we have to take care of ourselves and what we have going on first, like I said, so that we are the person who sets the tone, who starts it going. There's a term in the field reflective functioning, and this is our ability to think about feelings and feel about thinking. And it is a practice that a lot of us who are doing clinical work practice this and have reflective consultation. There's also a term called parental reflective functioning, which I said that to a friend of mine who was she works, I don't know, for a business somewhere. I'm like, that's great, parental reflective functioning. She's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, you thought about your child's mental states when you made that plan. Nice job. And she's like, oh, I thought that's just what you do. And it is. It's just what you do until it's hard or the big person is compromised, like the mom I was talking about earlier. And the big person needs to be regulated in order for the child to learn how to self-regulate. So it starts at the bottom of the ladder with caregivers need to be regulated first, and then we teach children how to self-soothe. We teach children along the way over steps to be able to do this. Nobody hands a screaming, thrashing grown-up an infant. You just don't. That caregiver has to be regulated before you hand your baby to them. So it starts with us, and it can be hard. So this is a little reminder about self-compassion. I like this Kristen Neff quote. And I want to distinguish it briefly from self-care. I will tell you, I am bad at self-care. I'm pretty good at other care. I'm pretty good at telling someone else they need a break. I'm pretty good at saying, I'll take over for this, and you go sit out. Self-care for Lauren feels like another thing to do. And I can tell you I got a massage gift card for Christmas that will probably expire before I get to it. But I can have self-compassion because that's a practice that I can build in. And that's different because it's about letting myself feel the feelings and not completely cut off and avoid, but also taking care of what I need. If self-care is something you just do, if you had a hard day so you make yourself run 6 miles to undo your hard day, or if you meditate, remind yourself of some positive attributes of yourself, and listen to a good song, that's more what I can do. So it's just a reminder to have compassion for yourself, and that being a big person caring for a stressed little person is hard. The second thing, so regulated reflective adults, and the second thing that we can help do so we don't repeat some of the negative stuff is joining. And that's one of our 2 main tools in developmental repair. I love joining. Joining is an intentional relationship. It is something that we use in therapy, and I use with kids that I come in contact with, kids I coach on the soccer team. I join with them. I meet them where they are, and I have a relationship with them that is for them. It's not a friendship with the first grader I coach. It is a joining relationship. And what we are emphasizing is that it communicates that I'm interested in what you're about. I'm interested in how you think about things. It seems very simplistic. It seems very simple, and it's because it kind of is. But it is the work on behalf of the adult. The other term up there is hired, in air quotes. Hired is something that we work to do to connect with kids and families who struggle with trusting. And it is, if I've had a rupture with a client or something, I have to get hired back to be their provider. And I work on joining, and I stay compassionate about what's hard for them. And if I can stay compassionate about their struggles, then I can connect with them, and I can empathize, and I can join with them in a way. And then I can see how they see the world a little bit better. And sometimes in consultation, when we're trying to get into the mind of a young person or even their caregiver, we will go and actually, instead of talking like this, we'll get next to them and see how they're seeing things. And it helps in therapy. It helps to move my chair over in group, to see their perspective, and not so that they have to explain it to me, but it's the work that I do to help join. I like this concept. And I've heard people even today do stuff like this. So this is, one of my colleagues called it the developmental repair comma, and this is also a very normal thing. But when we're giving kids a direction or a message, and if we're in tune to their perspective, we can add a little dose of what's in it for them. So it's kind of like to a little kid who's climbing on stuff. It's, could you get down? I care that your body is safe. Instead of get down. Really, it is simple, but to put it back up the list and priorities is really helpful. To another kid or an older kid, I might say, hand me your phone, it's 8 p.m. Your body needs sleep, it's good for you. That's what's in it for them. So it's a little bit of when I know what's meaningful, when I've joined with them and know what's meaningful, then I actually can get into their perspective and give them a message or a comment that speaks to them even better. I mentioned earlier rupture and repair. And what we know about relationships is when things have not gone perfectly, and we go back and revisit, and we check in, and we apologize, and we say, what can I do better? Those relationships can get stronger. This is in the parent-child relationship. This is in peer relationships. This is in marriages and those kind of partnerships. It's in work relationships. The repair after the rupture is key. I have to tell you one story that I do have permission to tell about a rupture in my household that happened a couple of days ago. Again, I have permission from the parties involved. And I mentioned my high schooler who is struggling to get his homework done and turned in. There was a big argument between the freshman and his father. Big argument, yelling. The other kids were hearing it. It's like, oh my gosh. So it got big. So I said to my husband, you got to go back up there. Just let him cool off, but you got to go back up there. You know that, right? He's like, yes, I know. So he's psyching himself up and bringing himself down. I'm like, low and slow. You guys are okay. It's what I say to myself when I walk into a dysregulated kid interaction. Low and slow. So he goes back in, and they have this little talk, and I kind of hear him in the other room. And I said, how was it? He's like, it was pretty good. Talked about priorities. We talked about putting homework first before electronics. And, I think it's pretty good. We had a nice conversation. I'm like, great, good job, Daddy. Good parent job. And later that evening, we did have his phone, the kid's phone, and I have the password because I pay the bill. So I will periodically go like, oh, what's going on in TikTok and Snapchat and various other platforms that I know nothing about. And I come across this text from earlier this evening, which was a little bit after the conversation that my husband had with him. His friend, oh God, my kid. My dad just made me have a regular conversation with him. This is child abuse. LOL. I could not even make that up. This was my week. And thank you. I said, can I, and then after some time, can I share this with people? Fine. This is, and I shared it with a colleague and said, hashtag therapist kid. Hashtag good job, Dad. Yeah. That's his perspective. Went through the motions. I have to think that it made some kind of impact to have a regular conversation. Probably doesn't constitute child abuse. However, it was hard for the adolescent to do that, but they got through it. And for that, I am proud of my boys. This is what my child would prefer. And some of our kids would prefer. And we can be that. There was a study in Australia about what adolescents need from their parents. And it was like something like, we want them around, but don't bother me. Be a potted plant. And we can also be that for young people. I feel like a potted plant at the rec center for the kids that I know and who may want to tell me something. They know what I do for a living, and they might need to run something by me when I'm available. So it's about being available and providing oxygen. I did notice this one over here where the plant was awfully close to that chair. So if there was someone doing homework there, that would be a really kind of difficult plant. And then the third thing I want to go over with you is it being an emotionally responsive adult. I give these concepts to teachers as well, and teachers that I have worked with, especially those who are serving kids in very stressed communities in some of our north side schools, but all schools have stressed kids in some way, is that you're not doing therapy, but you are being an emotionally responsive grown-up in their world. They are, and this, these terms here are things that we've brainstormed, that kids need all of these. Kids need connection and structure, but it's about titrating that balance and knowing when to be one than the other. I know where I'm comfortable on this list on the continuum. I know that I'm a connecting, deal-making, excuser, partnering, changing, let it go, individual neutralizer. But that's not always where I need to be in every situation, especially if I'm working with a kid in treatment or a kid who's trying to get through something. And so I can go over some of what this means briefly in that if we were all structure all the time, we'd be perceived as mean. If we were all connection, I'm pulling on some circle of security concepts if you're familiar with that. If we were all connection all the time, we might be perceived as weak to some kids. And so it's about knowing when to have a firm limit, and it's because I care about you type of thing. Directive and deal making, kids need both of these things. They need to know when it's time to move, but also, 2 minutes, please. Okay, I heard that. I was observing a classroom last week, and I heard the kids automatically, there was a 4-minute warning, and then the whole room said, 6. I'm like, what just happened? They even skipped the step where they said 2 extra, and they said 6, and the teacher said, okay. But they made it it gives kids a little bit of power where sometimes they don't feel much power. Excuse and explain. This one comes up a lot in our clinical work because we're really good at explaining why kids behave the way they do, because we're thinking about their bodies and we're thinking about their early childhood. We're really good explainers. And so some people think that all we do is excuse negative behavior, and that's not the case. But we can notice that if we know a family is struggling with maintaining their house or struggling with homelessness, and if a family is living in a shelter and kids are tired, that might explain the irritability, but it doesn't excuse hitting. So the excuse, explain. Independent and partnering. We want our kids to be independent learners who love school and knowledge and being a helper in the community, but sometimes they need a buddy. A lot of times they need a buddy. So it's knowing when I need to partner, when I need to give a kid a partner, or when I say, nope, that's your job. The I can change, we can change is kind of about responsibility. Who's gonna be the one adjusting? Who's gonna be the one to do it different next time? Who's gonna be the one to apologize? A lot of the time, it's the big person who's modeling. But sometimes we can challenge the kid to say, you can do it. Go check in with that kiddo. Do you see her face? And we can help them do that. The try it again, let it go. This is, I think, a lot about with limit setting. That I totally want to be a person who means what I say, and if I set a limit, I'm going to follow it through to the end. But that would make me really tired and crabby because it's not working. So there are some times where I say, you know what? The rule I set isn't working. I'm going to change my mind, and here's why. But for some of our kids who struggle with trust and haven't totally hired me, I would absolutely explain why I'm changing my mind. You know what? My mind thought that was going to work, but it's not working out for either of us, so let's do this plan, okay? Are you on board? So it's explaining why so that they can know what's in your mind so the world doesn't feel random. Individual and group is Sometimes everybody needs to hear something that's going on, and sometimes it's maybe in a family session, it's just like a little whisper, like giving someone a tip or something that would be helpful. And the last one, activate and neutralize. I added this one recently after reading Resmaa Menakem's book, My Grandmother's Hands. He uses this. It's a book about historical trauma. If you haven't read it yet, please put it on your list for 2019. He talks about when to stir up to motivate someone and when to bring it down. And both of these are important, but it's about sensing what can this person or this group handle at this time. Sometimes I tweet for Ann Garrity. I tweeted this. It got a lot of likes at Dev Repair. So a couple more ideas that I want to reinforce are that kids need options. Kids need options. Development is hard. There's a lot of natural challenges in childhood and adolescent development. And adults need to be, sometimes they need to tag team. Sometimes they need different experiences. Sometimes they need to go hang out with their grandparents for a weekend. Sometimes the coach needs to give them the same message that mom has given him several times, but somehow it sounds different coming from the coach. But they are practicing. They're practicing behavior. They're practicing social skills. They're practicing in development. And they need options of how to do it, and they need room to do it. And then for the big people, we need to support each other. I read an article about how parents of middle schoolers are among the loneliest of parents. And that made me sad because I have one. And I really thought about it, and it's that time where kids are developmentally pulling away. And they need to do that. They need to start that early adolescent time. So what the article said is the best thing that parents can do is find other parents with kids around the same age so that you can talk to. Yeah, my kid won't talk to me. I don't even think he even spoke to me today. Oh, mine either. I bet they talked to each other, but they texted each other about something. But it is about supporting each other. And also something to reinforce that as well as when any person, little or big, has a lot of stress, where it's blowing through their coping, there's two ways to go. There's dissociation, which is what some of our highly traumatized kids and families and adults do. Dissociate. The other thing is reach for company. Company helps reduce stress. A friend, a call to someone, running into someone who sees your face and actually telling them what's going on. Company brings stress down. So big people being part of networks and being part of communities where they can help each other really helps us be present for the kids when their stress bubbles up. So, I'm going to leave that in the background. A little message for you all, that we are not perfect humans and we are not raising perfect humans, but we can be, well, good enough, but now I've lived in Minnesota for a while, so pretty good. We can be pretty good for our little people. And we can help do things for ourselves as reflective and curious adults who try their best to be emotionally responsive. We can do some hard things and support each other. So at this time, I would like to talk with other people and have other people talk with each other about stuff that came up or questions. And my friend Jatan is going to walk around with a microphone so that everyone can hear everyone.
Good evening, everybody. Oh, this is loud. Turn me down, Amy. Wow. I don't like to yell at people. I'm sorry. Yelling is a trigger. I know my triggers. Good evening. Thank you guys for hanging out. This is the Q&A, and I would like to open with a quote, if that's okay. Anybody here anti-quote? All right, awesome. No pain is so devastating as the pain a person refuses to face, and no suffering is so lasting as suffering left unacknowledged. Semerek and Brown, since we're talking about healing historical trauma. Is there a question in the audience yet? Oh, good. I like this. Yes, yes, yes.
So, thank you, Lauren, especially for the quotes. There was one in particular, well, two, of course, Anne's quote, "My job is to help you, your job is to let me." The quote by the name I can't pronounce.
Bunsen Brenner.
Yes. Yeah. I wish I had that quote when I was still a principal.
Oh.
That's quite powerful. So that whole idea, my job is to help you, your job is to let me. As an emotionally responsive adult, we're assuming that the balance, that whole continuum you showed, excuse, explain, all of that assumes that there are adults that get that well enough, right? And as you pointed out, we're human beings. We're going to make mistakes. So let's assume that for the children that we interact with, for those of us who are in positions of interacting with children, let's assume that we're all emotionally responsive.
I'm assuming that of this.
Yes.
For sure.
Yes. There are some days we're not, though.
Right.
Because we're human. So just interested in that whole idea of repair. Can you talk more about that repair piece? Because my assumption as a human being that makes mistakes in relationships, that there are going to be times and need for repair, even as an emotionally responsive adult that I know I am. So what does it look and sound like? What is the language of repair? What can we as adults, what should we as adults expect from just that whole interaction?
Yes.
Does that make sense?
That's great. And I think it looks different for different people and different kinds of relationships. I think it's authentic. I think it's genuine. It comes from, and it also comes from helping you to make sense. And as you were talking, I am reminded of a young person who has graduated from my day treatment program, and I worked with him and his adoptive mother for a while. And this young man was struggling with, he was going through a hard time. It was actually an anniversary of a death in his family, and he was just, stuff was coming up. Stuff he couldn't name was coming up. And his adoptive mother, who was an extended family member, knew that stuff was coming up. And then this young man made some comments about wanting to hurt himself, and made comments that were kind of scary to his adoptive mother. So there was lots of triggers. There was an anniversary, there was the comments he was making, and his caregiver kind of blew up and yelled at him. And so he retreated to his room, and I saw them a couple days later. And a caregiver wanted to repair this, and she wanted support in this situation, because, as it turns out, her brother at the exact same age had committed suicide, had died by suicide. And she was very triggered, and it came up as blowing up. And I actually was honored, and it's one of those handful of times in a therapy session where I'm like, don't cry, or don't cry too much. Because what I saw in front of me was the honesty of this caregiver, who acknowledged what was going on with her adoptive son, who could say, I was scared. And what you did reminded me of my favorite relative ever. And I don't want it to happen to you. And that authenticity and that vulnerability of that caregiver shifted this young man, who was still, even after many years, still hiring the caregiver. But that connection shifted that relationship a bit, and I still can't even believe I got to be part of it. And it was very, very helpful in that, because there was some repair for her that needed to happen. She hadn't thought about that death in a long time. She tried to push it out. But this brought up so much for both of them, that the repair was for that whole system there. That's kind of a big example, but there's little ones too. like, I'm sorry. I had a stressful day, stuff like that as well. Thank you.
Another question?
Lauren, I have a friend who is an educator, and he trains a lot of other educators, and he talks a lot about celebrating kids' mistakes, and that, you know, that when you make a mistake, that's how you learn, that's how you grow. But I wondered, in the context of some of this, how you think about that, or how you talk about that, or how you know, whether it's, whether it's in day treatment or whether it's in your family with your, you know, with your 15 or 16-year-old. I mean, how do we, you know, in a real way or authentic way, how do we celebrate the mistakes that kids make, because they are trying something that they weren't able to do, and they do have the opportunity now to learn from it, but they feel like a failure, and maybe they even get yelled at. Yeah. So. Right.
I like the celebrating the mistakes, because it's, I mean, there's probably a quote somewhat that looks like that says mistakes are proof that you're trying. I'm sure I saw it on Pinterest. That is, it is important to test out things, and then there's all the parenting philosophies. We kind of want to let kids screw up a little bit, and kind of this is the time to screw up a little bit, because we're here. You're not on your own, living on your own, screwing up on your own and not able to fix it. Screw up here while I'm right, you know, behind you a few steps. And so that I can help you learn, and so I can help you learn that you can ask me a question, or you can rely on this person over there. The other thing I thought about with perfectionism, kids who are very perfectionistic, who don't even want to try because they want to be perfect on the first one. So they won't stick with it. They try it once. If it doesn't work, they give up. And that's kind of in the try it again, let it go. And I've actually used that for a perfectionistic kid who happens to live at my house and is the youngest of 3 boys. And this little person thinks he's big. Like, he's little, but he thinks he can do what everybody else in the house does. So when he was 4 and wanted to tie his shoes by himself, he just thought he could just go ahead and move those laces around and have it happen. But it caused much sadness, and it caused many meltdowns. So this particular 3rd child needed to learn how to let it go, and so or try 5 times and ask for help, and then that helped with some of that. He wanted to give up, and this is a different kind of sticking with it. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you guys for those questions. Are there any other questions from the floor right now? Oh.
Lauren, guess what? I get to work in an environment to support adults that work with kids, and often I notice adults are emotionally dysregulated often. So how can we apply this model in the workspace working with adults? Could it be translated to adults for use with adults? I'm just curious.
You think so? I think so. I think that, especially in a workplace that you kind of you're in your zone, you want to do your job. Sometimes it's the looking up and remembering the people around you and reaching out to the people around you. And I think in an environment where you're working with stressed kids, the adults can absolutely get stressed. This is a building that serves children and families with toxic stress. We're going to get stressed out. And some of the, there will be some relationships where there is a rupture. And the going back and the dedication to fixing it and the dedication to coming back together is what can strengthen the work relationships as well. So I think so.
I think so too, Lauren. I wasn't yelling that time, was I? Are there any questions? Oh, we have a question over here. I feel like I'm on the Oprah show.
I work with in an environment with kids a lot, and any advice for partners who may not kind of understand what you do and how to support you, and how sometimes that feels a little hard to kind of manage your own self and your emotions when a partner may not be super understanding or supportive of that?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Deep
That's
breath.
a real good one.
Deep breath.
Ooh. So I think there are some jobs like the ones it sounds like you're doing and then some of the stuff that we do that are really hard to explain because it's so relational. And that there are people who have jobs and there are people who do work. This is work. And serving stressed kids is kind of a calling for many of us. And it might look like psychology, and it might look like teaching, and it might look like being an advocate. But I think there is a calling that people who do it know. And people who are partnered or married to those people just say, okay. And I think that's one of the differences in this kind of serving profession. And that it takes a bit of time for those folks who are not in this kind of business who really see people. And I'm thinking of times where I've seen a person really, this is a horrible term, lose it, like decompensate, like really fall apart in front of me. And that's really hard to describe, to see someone go to the depths, to the bottom, and to help them back out, or someone with major depression, or to witness a fight in a home or something like that. And because we're in relationship with people, and so it takes a toll on us. And I think that where our self-compassion really comes in, and in my experience of being in my nuclear family, everybody works in communications, radio, and television. Like my dad was an anchor man. He does not understand exactly what I do. And it's really hard to explain, but they're like, good job, honey. Which is just, that's what I need. And I know that I can't get a total understanding from everyone around me, but I have my people. I find my people. I find my Jatons and my Chantels and my Chantels and my Steves. And you get it. I find that pocket of people, because not everybody's going to understand that relational calling.
That was kind of deep, Lauren. Thank you. Are there any questions? Awesome.
I could probably ask this question on any given day, but so I work with lots of adults, primarily adults who all have trauma themselves, who in turn have traumatized kids. And when I think about joining, like, where is a good spot to start? And I know that's loaded, but even just thinking, like, where can I meet this group of 10 to 12 people on how they can even support their scholars, but I'm trying to join with them, or even model what it looks like to be emotionally responsive. Like what's the first step?
That's a good one. I'm gonna also phone a friend. My friend Jaton is gonna jump in on this question as well.
I just knew you were going for the other Chantel. I was coming back this way.
You got the microphone. One thing I think of is starting with what we can model for that group. And I know the sense of you and the kind of the vibe that you're giving off right now. You're kind, and so you're starting it going by your presence with that group of 10 to 12 very stressed parents. And I think that, and as we talk about reflective practice, we kind of need to have something in us as providers, and the big people in the room, even though there's probably someone taller than you in the room every single time. But you're the big person because you have the power in being a provider, and that you can help set it up that this is how we treat people and this is how I'm treating you. Because what we want is for that to trickle into the parents, and the parents to be a little more filled up, and that trickles down to the kiddos. In our work in some schools that Jatan and I consult in, we see that in the teachers quite a bit. That when they feel filled up, they can be more present. When Jatan has a group with them or something, or you have some inspirational time, they can go and teach in a way that before they felt kind of empty or there was a void.
You didn't need me to answer that. I would have.
Oh,
I would have said it when it feels right. when joining feels right. Yeah. So you didn't. That wasn't as deep as the answer as Lauren gave. Are there any questions on the floor? Awesome. I love it that you guys have questions.
It's kind of a question for the whole group. So I work in a hospital with teens, ton of lonely parents feeling super isolated. I just haven't heard of a ton of great resources, so I'm throwing it out to the group for what you guys know
About teens.
or parents of
Parents
teens,
of teens.
to connect.
I do want the group to answer this, but I noted something in my brain recently.
Yeah.
And it was when my kids were little, there was a lot of, this was when blogs were big. There was all these little kid mommy blogs, and here's what craft to do with your 2-year-old, and all of this stuff. And then as the kids got older, the blogs went away. Well, where's the fun activities to do with my 15-year-old? Come on. Because it's hard. Because adolescents point our stuff out to us, move it around, throw it around the room, and throw it back and stomp on it on the floor. And so what resources do we have to support parents of teenagers? What do you guys know about?
I do know that NAMI has some parent groups to support kids who have mental health concerns.
NAMI, N-O-M-I, NAMI. Oh, I'm sorry, N-A. Yeah, thank you.
So company. So you're even saying they're lonely. Yeah. It's lonely time because they really do need to pull away and be more with peers. And you have these parents who are still remembering when they used to sit in their lap.
Proof Alliance has a support group for adolescent or teens transitioning into adulthood. Yeah, that's for parents with or adolescents with FAS, fetal alcohol spectrum.
Good.
Community education. Community education classes can be really a good place for grown-ups to connect with other grown-ups because it taps into their own passions and the things that they're interested in. So any school district in Minnesota has one of the best community education resources. Like, we are the state for community education.
The state. No, legit. I believe it.
I believe her too.
We're the state. That's awesome.
NAMI parent support groups are mentioned, but NAMI also has programming specifically for teens with mental illness, progressions class, and some support groups specifically for LGBTQ plus communities, as well as the Pacer Center has a couple of teen programs as well for children with disabilities.
Pacer, yes.
Shout out to Pacer for sure. I saw a hand over here. No? Okay, I'm just going to make you guys ask a question. Did anybody else have any resources they wanted to throw our friends' way?
I'm not sure that this is a resource, and I haven't had small children or teens in my family for a while, but in remembering, we just made use of the parents along the side of a soccer field. Yes. And the parents of gymnasts, and, and it wasn't necessarily resources as much as, oh, you're experiencing the same thing I am,
yes,
or you have gone through this. So it was actually making use of the community around you. You lift your head up and you find out whether it's a faith community or sports community, or that kind of gave us a sense of community and people experiencing similar things.
Yes, and when you're on the sidelines, chances are you have a kid of the same developmental level. Maybe you're one of the older parents or one of the younger parents, but you know what it's like to have a kid around that age. And I like what you said about lift your head up, because there are people out there. There are people out there who are going through what you are in raising children.
What I'm hearing you say is like proximity friendships, right? We have the same proximity because we're in the same area, which if you are working in a hospital waiting rooms are a place to develop proximity relationships, because the people who are waiting in a hospital room have something going on. So anything that you can come up with to facilitate those proximity relationships, because people feel real isolated in those moments.
I don't want to toot our horn. I wasn't going to say this, but Northside Achievement Zone offers family education classes as well. So
I was also thinking YIPA does too, even as a resource.
Oh, yeah.
I want to make sure I say Youth Intervention Programs. It's the acronym is YIPA, Y-I-P-A, Youth Intervention Programs Association. Even just has a lot of information to support parents with, like especially if your teen is going through a transition you don't recognize. It's just a really, like, there's a lot of training available online and programs you can participate in and readings. It's a wonderful resource.
You'd be a whole forest of potted plants.
a lot of YIPA is free. A lot of the programming is free. Are there any other resources we want to share? This is good. This is community. This is what community looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else? All right, any questions? Any burning questions? No. Otherwise, I have my phone. We have some preset questions. How about that? And so I piggyback on the vibe in the room. How would you suggest this? I'm gonna rephrase this a little. How would you suggest showing up and being different and providing positive support when all you've grown up with is dysfunction?
Oh.
I'm gonna sit down while you answer.
Oh. Who was I talking to this week? I was talking to somebody in this field, and truth is, I know several people who are like this, where they. Oh, I remember who it was. One of my students this morning said this, and she works with adolescents. And she said, I'm so excited for this class. It's a child and adolescent practice class. She said, I'm so excited because I had a horrible adolescence. I'm like, those sentences seem weird together. And she's like, really, it was so awful for me. And I really want to work with adolescents because I somehow got through it. And I don't want it to be so hard for them. And something about when there's a similar experience and they're on the other end, maybe even just a few years out, and if my student can be aware of her triggers, and if my student can have enough support, that experience of having a horrible, what she called, I don't know what happened, having a horrible adolescence can really help her clients. And so I know many people in this field who got through something, and many supporters of children. Like I said, just development in general is stressful. But going through really, really challenging things can provide such a helpful lens on kids who are going through stuff. So I think that for our big people who are beginning to be aware, it's hard, but once they can start saying, oh, it can be different. I can be different. I can parent differently. And looking at other models of parenting and other people and pulling on their resources, they can start to do things different, but they will need a lot of support. So things like Family Academy and having a clinician can be really helpful.
That's good. Thank you, Lauren. Are there any questions? Oh, nice question.
I've had my own experiences in my childhood and early adulthood that I've been able to bring to the table to like help kids understand or like just approach it from an empathetic perspective. Like, hey, I know exactly how you feel. I've been through, the same thing. And if appropriate, sharing my own story has been sometimes really helpful for kids. Like, wait, you're an adult and you're not, I'm not alone. You experience this and you're still being an adult and you've got a job and you've got a career, like, hey, if she can do it, I can do it too. And so sometimes I think from that experience is we're modeling that behavior, we're modeling that we can be resilient, and we're modeling that we can get through those hard times. And sometimes that's just a perspective that the kids do need.
I think that's huge. And also it can be in the network. And even if a child isn't like in your care, to be someone who made it through can be just an important person to be in orbit of a young person.
Brings me to another quote. Between stimulus and response is the freedom to choose. That's Viktor Frankl. Do we have a question?
I just wanted to ask a question from a parent perspective. Being around our kids all the time and especially, if there are multiple kids with special needs. It's very hard to get a break, to find other caregivers, to get away from them. And so then they do see us when we're dysregulated and when we lose it.
Yes.
And these are kids that really need their world to be predictable. So then how do we circle back and help our kids feel safe, even though we can't be perfect for them?
Right. That is so, I just want to validate just how hard that is, especially if you have a little person who's having a hard time understanding it or who has had so many other disruptions. And I think when we've joined with a kid and we're in tune with them, that making sense of it in a way that fits their perspective, or it fits in a way that they can developmentally understand it and take it in. And it might look, for a younger child, it's mommy was having a hard day and she cried, but I asked for help and I'm going to feel better. Or even it won't always be like this. And making sense for the individual child is a challenge, and it can help make sense of what all is happening, so that they don't take the burden on of I did this, I caused this, because that's what we don't want. But that honesty and that bit of vulnerability, I can still keep our routine even while I'm sad. Or if I get too sad or if I get too upset, I'm going to ask your aunt to come help. But letting kids know what's in your mind so they don't have to guess can be really, really helpful. Because we know what's in our mind and we know what's in there, but oftentimes forget that step of communicating what's in my mind, so that kids, and especially our kids who've had a lot of stressors, when they fill in the blanks, it's really negative. Very, very negative. But when we give them enough of the story, then they can make sense of it in a way that's more productive and less scary and less surprising.
Thank you for that question. Are there any?
Actually add something that I think that another aspect of that is that your self-compassion slide to forgive yourself that this happened.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
And to just acknowledge that it's part of your normal life, that this is going to happen, that you're going to be lose it periodically because of the world that you live in, and be aware of that. I mean, obviously the techniques that you were talking about with the children, but just your own self-compassion plays a role in this, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that. Maybe one more question?
Wanted to touch on, is there a point of over disclosure? With certain kids, is there a point of, I'm trying to think of how to word this.
Too much information?
Yeah, exactly. Of sharing too much of maybe what's going on in yourself?
Yes. Yes, I think there is a point where if kids know too many of the big people problems, they're going to take on the big people responsibility. If they know too much about the bills, if they know too much about what you did last weekend, it's kind of overwhelming. It's kind of overwhelming to their little their world, and giving enough of a shell. If you think about it, an example would be the sex talk at different age groups. To give all the information to a 3-year-old, I mean all the information, you can see them get overwhelmed. They're like, what? But giving the science-y shell part of it to a preschooler or a kindergartner can be like, oh, okay, that's enough. And many kids can kind of tell you what is too much. But what we don't want is for the little people to take on the big people problems because they know too many of them. So that's a good question. Yes.
I actually just wanted to comment just to say that generally when most, and I don't know who was it that was speaking, but generally when you have mostly positive experiences and exchanges with a child, relationship repair can be done with ease. So just remember that when you're feeling stressed, that so long as you're giving that little person an experience that is positive the majority of the time and genuinely are able to be present for them, that relationship repair is going to be a lot easier.
Nice, well said. Thank you.
If I can tell the story as I run over here. I remember a time, and Benice may remember this, we were at Hall, and I got a phone call. There was a young man who was irate and he was throwing things. The room was a mess by the time I got there. He was on top of the table, his desk, and the teacher was like kind of losing it. And so I got up on the desk with him. I said, "Hey, what's happening up here today?" So in his middle of his stress, we joined. So joining felt right then. And so he's kind of looking at me like, "You're not even supposed to be up here." And I'm kind of like, "Why don't we just sit down?" So we sat down. We eventually got to having a conversation. We found out he was hungry. And we also found out he was worried about the water bill at home. Oh. Right? So just being able to be that calm body, that supportive, not only just for the student, but I was there for the teacher as well, right? So just in our adult world, we can use that. I could have used that same scenario with my own kid at home when she's fighting with her brother, right? Awesome. Right here and then one more line.
All right, last two.
To add to this, I think one of the things that I know I talk about a lot with parents is setting unrealistic expectations. Like expectations nobody could in a normal 24-hour day. Even if you have a lot of responsibility, if you set your standards so high that you're setting yourself up to fail, you will feel that much more overwhelmed when you do, rather than setting a limit, even if it's high, but one that you can attain, so then you can feel success. And then when you feel regular success, then that's when you add to it, and that means adding a buddy, or maybe if you can't sleep 8 to 10 hours a night, you get 2 hours here, and then when you have time to circle back, okay, you take 2 more minutes, you know what I mean? And you just
Baby
add.
steps.
Yep.
Yes.
So then it's not so overwhelming when it doesn't happen the way you envision it, or wrote it out, or sent in an email. Like, adults need to feel success just like kids do too.
That's right, in little pieces. I like that. I like that.
Chantel, nice. Kindness. Adults can be kind to ourselves.
Yeah, kind to ourselves.
To the person over there was talking about like when you should share information, or like oversharing versus undersharing. I think one of my coworkers told me, what's the benefit of sharing the information? Is it a benefit for the kid, or is it the benefit for you?
Yes.
And when it's the benefit of the kid, then it's not an oversharing. But if it's just because you want to, get some stuff out, but it really has no benefit to the kid, then it's usually oversharing.
I think that's important in a lot of our exchanges, to think about, who's this for? Is it for me, or is it for them? And especially if we're in a big people or provider role, we want to do it for the benefit of the child as much as possible. Thank you so much for being here tonight and the conversation.
Thank you for coming and for sharing in this evening with us. I'm sure it's tropical outside after we all got here today. Huge thank you to our sponsors. So Leslie and Stuart Crosby and Brett and Marilyn Marmo from Agency Squid sponsored this event tonight. Through the donations we get from our supporters in the community, we're able to put on things like this. So please keep us keep connected with us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. I missed one. WashburnTrainingInstitute.org. All the fancy tech things. But we're so happy that you were here today and to share this space with us, and appreciate you being partners with us in this amazing work. So have a good night. Stay warm.